Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's a wonderful occasion. Emily orchestrated. Very good. So I'm here to welcome you all to celebrate Emily. And to speak to Emily Spieler's leadership and many accomplishments at the law school. I know others will speak with much more knowledge of her wonderful achievements in other areas of her professional life. Emily Spieler came to Northeastern University School of Law 2 decades ago as an outsider from West Virginia. She's leaving Northeastern as the ultimate insider. Having shaped our small but special law school through her leadership and exemplifying the best of who we are through her advocacy for workers' rights. As a leader, Emily embodies the ethos of our law school and university. Mission-driven, public interest focused, innovative, and as one of our alumna once characterized the law school to me, scrappy. The result was a deanship filled with wonderful accomplishments. A remodeled building that is the cornerstone of learning and community at the law school. Witness the launch of our LLM program, founding the NU Law Lab, implementing our loan forgiveness program, and of course, critical faculty hiring. These were all pillars of the evolution of the law school, from its 1968 roots as a leading public interest law school at a university with local focus, to a leading public interest law school that speaks to the problems of our contemporary times and the education of the next generation of great public interest leaders within a university with global aspirations. This is a remarkable achievement, one for which I, as dean, and the entire law school community owe Emily a tremendous debt of gratitude. On a personal note, I wouldn't be standing here before you as dean if it weren't for Emily first recruiting me to be part of her leadership team and being a stalwart member of our law faculty, helping lead major initiatives when she stepped down as dean, including our newest center focused on racial justice. Leader, trusted confidant, and most of all, very good friend. For all of this, Emily, thank you.
Thanks, James. If you're following the program, you'll see that I'm Greg Wagner. Emily told me that I failed to introduce myself, and I told her that I knew a few of the people in the room. It really is great to be here. I've been given the unenviable, or maybe highly enviable task of talking about Emily and her work and her interests before she came to Northeastern, so that many of you who may have begun to know her when she walked in the door here, or she didn't walk since she just had a depressed fracture of her tibial plateau, so she came in hobbled through the door. So what I'd like to do is to provide a thank you, a brief slideshow in 2 parts, and that's going to bracket a what you don't want a slideshow.
No,
So, I think of Emily as an accidental academic. I mean, most of you who've seen her here know that she's a pretty good academic. She teaches with passion. She writes well. She serves on committees. I'm not sure that I've got the technology. Oh, here we go. So actually, Emily and her brother, who will be joining us shortly, had parents. But they were parents with a sense of adventure. Each was the love of the other's life, and they instilled so much confidence and a commitment to social justice in Emily, and she carried it with her throughout. So she went to high school and graduated. She went to college, where we began to hang out, and Judith Baker actually is the source of this photo. Brooke was the one who handed it to us. We got closer during college. And somewhere along the line in college, we went out to neighboring reservations, the Cheyenne and Crow reservations that were separated by the Custer National Battlefield. We tended to look for things to do that were far away and interesting. So the next year, I think we went to Ninilchik, Alaska to can salmon. We didn't can salmon for very long, but it gave each of us a lifetime of stories to tell about occupational safety and health failures. In college, we were at demonstrations where I'm not sure what was going on in the tree, but whatever it was pretty awful. And Emily graduated from college. After that, we took jobs with the Housing and Development Administration in New York City, where we worked on turning low-income, rent-controlled apartment buildings that were being abandoned by the landlords but milked into tenant-owned cooperatives. We laid out the plans. Emily went from office to office interviewing people, and each person that she was trying to put together the process, the procedure book, would ask her, "Are you a lawyer?" And after a few months of that, she said, "Well, maybe there's something to this." So I have it right, it was Valentine's Day. We took the LSATs together. She took them because she wanted to go to law school. I took them just to be companionable. So then she went to law school. And during law school, we figured out a way for both of us. She worked for the Navajo Legal Services one summer while I was in the Shiprock Hospital. And at the end of law school, we thought, since we had just won a travel fellowship to go to Yugoslavia and we were uncertain about the social mores, we decided it might be time to get married. So we had a picnic and got married. And went to Yugoslavia. Came back where Emily worked in Central Square with a group of women at the Women's Law Collective, and then doing labor and employment with a colleague in a small firm where she represented the interns and residents at Cambridge Hospital and said interns and residents were considered students, not employees, despite the fact that the hospital had no adult doctors in for 15 hours a day. And this had been tried nationally, and interns and residents had failed to be recognized as having the right to organize. Emily actually won the case in Massachusetts that was standard setting and ended up representing interns and residents at both Boston City and it really was the first in the nation. So I will continue this, much to Emily's frustration, after a brief pause for a video. It's great that Brad is here to set this up.
Greetings from West Virginia.
Hello from West Virginia, Emily.
The state that I am sitting is from is the state of West Virginia.
Last time you saw me, I had red hair. Times change.
What was Emily like to work with? Well, she kept us busy, energetic, always full of ideas.
Extremely bright, extremely knowledgeable, very compassionate.
An incredible resource, and also a person that was very, very, very knowledgeable and accessible.
Well prepared, tenacious, direct.
I studied with Professor Spieler at WVU Law School. She was absolutely my favorite professor.
West Virginia in the 1970s was a very different place than it is today. Labor unions dominated the state's politics. The United Mine Workers represented most of underground coal miners, and industrial workers at the state's chemical plants were highly organized. Meanwhile, anti-poverty programs were bringing a stream of college-educated social advocates into the state's rural hills and hollows. I was approached by a group of African-American employees of Union Carbide, a huge chemical plant at the other end of the Kanawha Valley from Cabin Creek. They had suffered pervasive employment discrimination on the basis of race, and I undertook to represent them in a federal anti-discrimination lawsuit. But I soon realized I was in over my head. I asked Emily if she would join the litigation, and thankfully, she agreed. Union Carbide was represented by the largest law firm in Charleston with a suite of stylish downtown offices. We were two young mothers with babies and minimal litigation experience, but with Emily's hard work and outstanding legal instincts, we pulled it off, achieving a class action settlement with Union Carbide.
I have witnessed firsthand the positive effect that Emily and Greg had on miners and industrial workers here in West Virginia. Emily and Greg first came here in 1978 and became associated with the Cabin Creek Clinic, which serviced hundreds of coal miners and their families. Cabin Creek Clinic sits in a 25-mile hollow with numerous underground coal mines. Thousands of miners suffered from OP known as black lung. Through Emily and Greg's great works, they provided legal and medical services which resulted in lifelong benefits to miners and surviving spouses.
Emily was always very energetic. She made a point to find out as much as she could about the different aspects of the labor movement here in the state, and then was very supportive of labor in her position at Labor Studies.
Emily played a number of roles in providing quality, affordable health insurance for over 200,000 West Virginians. The Public Employees Insurance Agency, or PEIA, provides health insurance to all state employees, all K-12 employees, all higher education employees, and their retirees. And it was in significant trouble, and Emily played a critical role on Governor Caperton's PEIA rescue team, and played an essential role in getting a balanced billing prohibition passed into state law so that medical providers could not bill beneficiaries for the balance. As somebody who's there on behalf of those 200,000 beneficiaries, I can say thanks, Emily, for a job exceedingly well done.
When Governor Caperton took office in January of 1989, the state was insolvent, and many of the programs, including workers' compensation, were facing insolvency. Emily was one of the key players who helped right the ship of state at that time as our workers' compensation commissioner. She worked hard to assure additional funding for the workers' compensation program to make sure that benefits continue to be paid. Emily's very outspoken, she's very bright, she's very committed, and she is a great teammate and collaborator.
It was Saturday, November 6, 1999. The Ku Klux Klan was rallying in two nearby cities. In response, the Morgantown Ministerial Association organized a celebration of community, drawing hundreds to the courthouse square to speak out against intolerance. I was out of town, but quickly learned that Emily Spieler had called on everyone to act proactively to threats to our community, suggesting that we need to lift our voices up together, not once every few years, but day after day. I would like to challenge us. Come, talk about how we can set the public agenda, how we can fight discrimination in the community.
I've known Emily Spieler in many ways, but most significantly through work on the state's tobacco litigation, seeking to recover money spent on catastrophic health care needs caused by the use of tobacco. The ultimate result for the citizens of West Virginia could not have happened without Emily marshaling the people, the politics, and the egos. And if I might say so, due to the fact that at her core, Emily Spieler is a passionate and effective advocate.
I've known Emily from, I think, the very first time she came to West Virginia. We were both very active in the public interest law community. Emily was in private practice, and then later we both served as deputy AGs at the Attorney General's office. At the time you assumed your position, there was a backlog of civil rights cases, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 or 1,600 cases. And your job, a somewhat Herculean task, was to devise a plan to deal with that backlog.
Over the next 18 months, about 380 cases were processed through the commission. 380 in 18 months versus 75 in 15 years. Justice did indeed flow like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream.
I think it's a testament to your dedication, your hard work, and really your creativity that we were able to deal with a huge backlog in discrimination cases in West Virginia. Emily subsequently served as the commissioner of the Workers' Comp Fund when I was in the legislature, in the House of Delegates, and in the state Senate. And then she went on into academia, as everyone knows.
I studied with Professor Spieler at WVU Law School. She was absolutely my favorite professor and one of my favorite people that I met in law school. The final was a 2-team member project. My part was done, and my team member announced that she was having a nervous breakdown and would not be participating. I went to Emily looking for some relief, and no one will be surprised to hear that there was none. This will happen, she said, deal with it. On many occasions, we practiced to appreciate that advice. A pregnant paralegal who had gave birth the day before a trial. My first chair, who failed to re-up her bar license and wasn't available for a murder trial. It was the best lesson I learned in law school. Just deal with it. Thank you, Professor Spieler.
I took Professor Spieler for labor law when I was in law school. Professor Spieler was an excellent instructor. He challenged me to understand how labor law interacts with the dynamics of collective bargaining and the power structures that exist between workers, unions, and employers. But what I really admire about Professor Spieler is how she took an interest in her students and was committed to supporting them.
We worked together here at West Virginia University for 12 years. It was a delightful 12 years for me having Emily here, since we did have this shared background. And we also had a shared interest in labor and employment issues and much to talk about. I especially appreciated Emily's stories and experiences in championing various kinds of causes, both in Southern West Virginia as well as around the world.
As a new member coming into a local that had been established, and at the time of an election, we had a new president that was very much instrumental in trying to get the members a lot more educated. I was tasked with that. I was introduced to Professor Emily Spieler at that time, and she became very quickly a close friend and an incredible resource for myself and for the local. She gave me a fish, but she also taught me how to fish so that I was able to learn how to spend time looking up arbitrations, looking up cases, to help the local. She has helped me in my life's work, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you, Emily.
I was a student of Emily Spieler's at West Virginia University College of Law. Now, I had already known of Emily Spieler by reputation. The state of West Virginia's Workers' Compensation Fund was facing bankruptcy. The governor appointed her to fix it, and she did. The governor got the credit, and he deserved it in a sense. He was smart enough to appoint Emily Spieler. Indira Gandhi says that there are two kinds of people, those who do the work and those who take credit. Try to be in the first group. There's less competition. Emily's been in the first group all of her life. And all of us who know her have been enriched by the experience. Wish her the best in retirement.
That is the proverbial hard act to follow, isn't it? But I did promise in two parts, in part because there were obviously things left out or footnotes to make for our time in West Virginia. And so I'm going to try to be brief. This is where we lived on almost a median divider between Cabin Creek Road and the West Virginia Turnpike. So we had to close the windows, but it was very hot. People felt that it was really, were sorry for us. We moved there during the summer, and we didn't have a garden, so they would deliver fresh fruit and vegetables to our porch or call us to come over. We spent a lot of time at the Cabin Creek Clinic together, both co-running the occupational health program, while Emily was also doing some practice in labor education. There were things that went on at the clinic that didn't get captured in the film, but Emily's, you really get a sense of what her passions were. For example, gathering information from surface miners in order to testify at regulatory hearings about the conditions in which sampling was taken, namely only in the rain is when the dust samples were taken. Emily and miners are often hard of hearing because of how much noise they're exposed to, and we got a soundproof room to be able to do good audiometric testing, but there was nobody to do the testing. So Emily trained and got certified as an industrial audiometric technician, probably the only one in this room. She realized that most of the clinic staff were relatives of minors, sisters, nieces, some nephews, and parents, and she organized a mind tour for the clinic staff, which was really amazing to help them get a sense. Some of them came away saying, oh, it's not nearly as bad as I imagined, and others said, I'm never going back. She took time to have fun, went hiking and enjoyed, and we had a couple of kids that sometimes we clothed. We put them to work early. Now you can see the guy under the arrow. He was back there on a break, taking a milk break, while his sister was helping to line the garden. We taught them about tool safety, and then put them to work. Gave them breaks, however, occasionally. Took them to demonstrations, and took them to the tops of hills. The state newspaper would periodically recognize people who were really doing outstanding things. And Emily got multiple smiles during the course of her public service. Even went whitewater rafting. Those of you who know that she's not exactly embrace exciting things like parachute jumping, but the governor was on this trip, and we figured if there's any time that it's going to be safe, his bodyguard was the one in front of me, in front of Emily, who's then in front of me. So there was a lot that went on in West Virginia. She had awards and recognition. I think some of my favorites were she was the first recipient of the West Virginia Martin Luther King Jr. Award during the first holiday celebration there. It was the Living the Dream Award for Advocacy of Justice in 1986. She got the Achievement in Government Service Award from the West Virginia Celebrate Women group, and got a Fulbright shortly before leaving West Virginia University. She also was given the Martin Luther King Award by WVU for her social justice commitment. So there are common threads to the work that she did there. A lot of it could be put into the commitment to actually believing that governmental organizations should function, that they should do what they're empowered to do, and they should be held accountable when they aren't. So everything from working on having an effective transfer program for sick minors to get out of dust, to making sure that people who have hearing loss, I'm going to pause for a moment. Minors that we tested had terrible hearing loss. We would file workers' comp claims for them. 6 months later, asked them, what happened to your claim? They said, well, I don't know, I got a letter that said that comp had received it, but nothing ever happened. So Emily organized litigation against workers' comp at the state Supreme Court to get them to do their job, which is process claims and award people with hearing loss. Similarly, the Human Rights Commission work that you heard about was an effort to hold the Human Rights Commission accountable. We moved to West Virginia to have adventures, to be with people we liked and admired, to seek meaningful work, and to find work that we could do both separately and together, and to have fun. And I think that we found all of that in West Virginia together. So thank you for listening to me ramble on about our time in West Virginia, but we are now going to enter the time of Emily's coming to Northeastern and her time since moving in the door here. The first person who's going to be talking about this Let me just get this along. And that's it will be Dr. David Michaels. David Michaels was the longest serving OSHA Assistant Secretary for Occupational Safety and Health. He served in the Obama administration, previously been a Undersecretary for Health, Safety, and the Environment. He's been a longtime friend and companion, and he's now a professor at George Washington University School of Public Health. So David has a few things to say.
What a treat to be here today. I actually thought I'd begin before West Virginia. I first met Emily and Greg at the American Public Health Association annual meeting in 1977. And I remember it so vividly because I was just phenomenal. I was blown over when I met these two people, and I said, what are you doing now? And they said, well, we're getting ready to move to Cabin Creek, West Virginia. So here were these two highly credentialed professionals. Emily had done her undergraduate time at Harvard and then Yale Law School. Greg had graduated from Harvard and then Einstein College of Medicine, making a commitment to a career in worker safety and health and advocacy for workers. And there are many academics, and I was just new in that world. I was meeting all of them who really, who talk the talk. That's what academics do, of course. Emily and Greg decided to walk the walk, and they've done that for what is now more than 45 years. And it's really been, they've really made a huge impact. And I've been very fortunate to have stayed in touch with them over the years and was able to collaborate with both of them. So I'll just talk about Emily, what I've really got to see of her work, and I hope we have a comparable event for Greg at some time. So Emily stands out as one of the nation's leading academic figures in workers' compensation in the century. I really think perhaps the leading workers' compensation thinker, academic, and advocate. She may be, I think of her as sort of the leading sort of legal scholar in workers' compensation, which is an incredibly important area for hundreds of thousands of workers with work injuries and illnesses. But you don't get many academics involved in that. And it's not a sexy area. Your papers and your studies don't get covered in the press. You don't get invited onto the NewsHour. There's almost no funding for research, but it is really, really important. One thing that's happened over the last several decades is there's been a race to the bottom. States competing with each other to reduce benefits, to make things worse for injured workers. And this is pushed by business groups and insurance carriers whose profits increase when payments to injured workers go down. It's pretty straightforward. The opposition to this race to the bottom is incredibly weak. Injured workers aren't well organized. The payments are so low that the attorneys in this field and the healthcare practitioners in the field are often not the bright lights in their communities. And Emily has been working really tirelessly from the time in West Virginia to the present, illuminating the impact of these really unfortunate developments so the nation can see what's going on. As commissioner of the Workers' Compensation Fund in West Virginia, that's what they call the West Workers' Comp system, she was able to sort of write that system and set up in a way that would provide fair and just benefits. Then after leaving the government, leaving West Virginia, she's written tremendously important papers on the breakdown of the workers' compensation system, the so-called grand bargain and what's happened to it, with her really illustrious collaborator, John Burton, who chaired the National Workers' Compensation Commission. He had been appointed to that position by President Nixon in 1971. And he and Emily really have sort of led the way and say, these are the problems in the system, this is how we have to do better. So, as many of you know, the workers' comp system is the only part of the social safety net with no federal oversight. States can do what they want, and as you've heard, they do. But the U.S. Department of Labor has historically had a great interest in ensuring that injured workers are not penalized for having been injured. So when Labor Secretary Tom Perez wanted to elevate the issue, of course, he chose Emily to author what I think is really a groundbreaking report called, and you can imagine this is a little bit of a rhetorical question, does the workers' compensation system fulfill its obligation to injured workers? And it's an important report. Unfortunately, the next administration stopped that initiative. But I think one of the things we should all commit ourselves to is trying to revive that, to try to make sure the workers' compensation system actually does fulfill its obligations to injured workers. Now, I was fortunate to serve in the federal government in 2 different public health agencies, and Emily played a central role in advancing the work that I was involved in both of these agencies. So going back to 2000, Congress set up a program with a terrible name, EOICPA, the Energy Employees Occupational Illness Compensation Program Act. We actually were going to call it EROICA, the energy related, but the Pentagon vetoed that. They said, EROICA, it's too much like erotica, we don't want to call it EROICA. So we're stuck with this EOICPA. And the idea was to provide compensation to workers in the nuclear weapons complex who had developed illnesses after having been exposed to radiation, to beryllium, to silica, to asbestos, other toxins used in making nuclear weapons. And it was a very complicated law, dividing responsibilities across several different agencies. Energy, which was responsible for the problems since they made the nuclear weapons. Health and Human Services, with NIOSH playing a role, and the Labor Department. And it also had this expectation that workers, for other conditions or some conditions, would apply to state workers' comp. And so at the time, I was serving as Assistant Secretary of Energy for Environment, Safety, and Health. And we set up an advisory committee to help us launch the program and ensure that workers were treated fairly by this new system. And so I was very fortunate. I appointed Emily to chair that. It's the Worker Advocacy Advisory Committee, which she did with great aplomb, helping the program get off the ground. It was a very high-powered committee, including some terrific union and DOE contractor representatives. And to help us address the public health issues, medical issues, we appointed Greg Wagner to that committee as well. And that advisory committee really did help set the program in the right direction. It's done well. It's pretty much under the radar screen, and has given out more than $23 billion to sick workers and the families of sick workers. And so fast forward to the Obama administration, and so it's not well known that the primary government agency that investigates whistleblower complaints for more than 20 statutes, from financial issues like the Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, to the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, to transportation laws, a lot of others, when whistleblowers raise a complaint with the government, the agency that does the investigations is OSHA. You'll be forgiven for not knowing that. Before I was nominated by President Obama to run that agency, I had never known that either. And so when I got to OSHA in 2009, the Whistleblower Protection Office was a backwater. It was a place where unwanted staff were dumped. It didn't have its own budget line or senior executive service director. And we were able to change that, to rebuild it, and we chartered the Whistleblower Protection Advisory Committee, made up of representatives of employers, workers, including Eric Fruman, who's on that committee, and Nancy Lesson, who are both here. Nice to see you both here. And the public. And the committee had no lightweights. It really was a very powerful committee made of many outspoken members and needed to tackle some very challenging issues. Emily, of course, who to name as chair? Emily. Because I knew that she could handle this responsibility. And she did. She did a truly masterful job, keeping the committee focused and productive, helping this new whistleblower protection office get off the ground. And I'll give you an example of the challenge we faced. In safety, from OSHA, we dealt with many types of employers, and we would recommend to employers that what they should do is they should have a system to prevent injuries from occurring, to find and fix hazards when they're there so people don't get hurt. In the whistleblower world, we had nothing like that. If employers would retaliate against people who would raise their voice, we'd say, don't do that. And that's not effective. So we asked the committee to develop a program to encourage employers to listen to potential whistleblowers and prevent retaliation. And Emily led that committee through a process that they developed, a really terrifically useful document, the was unanimously endorsed by all the members of that committee, which no one thought would ever happen. And the labor management public health, this is really a good document, and they remain very proud of that document. It's still out there and being used, and the OSHA still puts it out there. And so, Emily has done much, much more. I was given a very limited period of time, so that's what all I'm going to talk about. But I just want to end by saying how grateful I am, and how grateful I think so many workers in the United States should be for Emily's outstanding work and her remarkable, impactful career.
Continuing looking at Emily's workers' health and safety advocacy will be Marcy Goldstein-Gelb, who is the co-director of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health. And Marcy is in the standing room only crowd.
I wanted to see your picture. So, being the shortest of the crew, I'm going to lower the mic. I am incredibly to have a broken microphone. There we go. I am really, really thrilled and honored to be here and to follow Greg's beautiful honor to Emily and of course David Michaels. It's such a pleasure to be here. I have had the good fortune of knowing Emily before being at the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, when I became executive director of the Massachusetts COSH group back in 1999. But before I go any further, I do have an important question. Are there any attorneys in the room? I just want to be sure, because as a public health professional, I'm going to be requesting attorney-client privilege as I reveal a confidential diagnosis of our guest of honor. Having observed that when uttering the phrase injured workers experiencing retaliation, Attorney Spieler turns several shades of red, experiences dilation of her pupils, and strong heart palpitations. And I just want to note that these symptoms are never accompanied by flight. On the contrary, and my expert opinion indicates that Emily has an absolutely unflappable passion for worker health and justice. Would anyone here agree with that? And while I've observed this for about 23 years, there are colleagues here, Nancy Lesson was mentioned, Tali, Elise, and others, who came well before me to MassCOSH and made the same observation. So I think it's pretty well proven. And during my tenure, Emily became an invaluable member of the MassCOSH Legal Committee, keeping laser focused on ensuring that workers who are the most vulnerable, immigrants, temp workers, day laborers, those that serve our food, those that package our meals, those that clean our homes, that are most often threatened with retaliation, have the highest rate of injury and death, could achieve their right to safety, justice, medical treatment, and compensation. I think she was pretty familiar with the term essential worker just a bit before COVID came out. And she worked tirelessly with MassCOSH to pass some pretty groundbreaking legislation, including winning safety protections for public sector workers, stronger child labor protections, increased burial benefits for family members that were impacted by fatalities, and expanded coverage for scarring for people who were injured. And she continues to work hard for legislation to strengthen workers' compensation, anti-retaliation protections. And today we actually have something to celebrate. There was an announcement of stronger protections that came out of the city of Boston that built on an earlier ordinance that Emily worked with me and others at MassCOSH in the aftermath of the death of 2 workers who were killed in a trench fall and completely preventable, which later we were able to turn into something positive, an ordinance that ensures that if you're doing construction in Boston, you need to demonstrate that you don't have a history of violations and that you've got the necessary safety personnel on staff. So thank you to Emily. even when I moved on to National Kosh, Emily sort of tagged along, couldn't get rid of her, thank God. She was eager to bring her wisdom and talents to the national scale. And of course, she was the first person I turned to when National Kosh was threatened with a lawsuit by an employer, not to be named, who was included in our Dirty Dozen report. And the minute they learned that Emily was involved, though she was not representing us officially, but just hearing her name led them scuttle away with their tail between their legs. Thank you, Emily. And in Emily's spare time, I don't know what that means, she and I both taught at the Harvard Trade Union program, where she guided up-and-coming labor leaders on issues such as the connection between debilitating overexertion at work and the opioid crisis. So I am actually pretty hesitant to use the word retirement when it comes to Emily, because I don't really think her condition is curable. But I do hope, unlike COVID, I catch whatever she's got and will certainly hang around her as much as possible to maximize my viral load.
Carl Clare is known to all in this room and many outside it. What I didn't know is that he's actually the George J. and Kathleen Waters Matthews Distinguished University Professor, but I just know him as a fabulous person and a well-beloved professor, Carl Clare.
I'm very, very happy to be included in this. You've heard so much about Emily's accomplishments as a lawyer and as a policy advocate and as a public servant. I want to focus in my few minutes on Emily's achievements and her special legacy as a teacher. Over the decades of her career as a teacher and later as a dean, she faithfully and imaginatively pursued a certain vision of legal education. Her passion and her commitment was to inspire, to nurture, and to send out into the world successive generations of young lawyers who would fight for justice for workers. Now, this was not to the exclusion of other social justice concerns, but it drew upon a certain tradition exemplified by the labor law professor who inspired me 50 years ago, the great Supreme Court litigator Bernard Dunow. From day one until she taught her last class a few weeks ago, Emily demanded technical precision, theoretical sophistication, and real-world grounding from her students. But she also conveyed to them unmistakably that the heroes of these cases are the workers themselves, many of whom do very brave things and endure hardship to push back against injustice. Emily came out of the New Left generation of the 1960s, but she always pushed boundaries and never hesitated to question hallowed verities. So now, and there's a new trend in legal education these days to conceive of the field, what we used to call labor law. It's now called work law. It's a little broader than traditional collective bargaining. Emily pioneered that territory 40 years ago with her practice and her pedagogy on occupational safety and health, on social insurance, on alternative forms of worker voice to traditional unions, and more recently her work on whistleblowing. Now there's another new trend in legal scholarship, which is to understand social identities as intersectional. And this casts doubt upon some earlier traditions that romanticize the industrial worker as the privileged agent of social change. Emily pioneered that territory 40 years ago, 45 years ago in her teaching and her practice and her activism. It's now sexy for American lawyers who traditionally were insular to be interested in comparative labor law. She was doing that decades ago. Emily's work as a teacher deeply reflected the view that good teaching of social justice lawyers involves mentoring in the form of endless moot court teams, independent study projects, and the like, which means a lot of sacrifices of time and leisure. Emily also mentored budding law teachers. I'm sorry that Stephanie Amon won't be able to be present tonight to speak to that. But here's something, and I think this is probably obscure to everyone except the insiders, but it's very important. Over the past 20, 25 years, many law schools have dropped labor law from the curriculum or marginalized it by consigning its teaching to unheralded adjunct professors. Here, Emily can take pride in an important achievement, one that had, I must say, a very direct and important effect on my own life. Both as a teacher and in this respect, more importantly, as a dean, Emily acted from the conviction that the pursuit of economic justice for working people and the training of successive generations of lawyers to do that work makes a central and indispensable contribution to democracy and human decency. We cannot have a democratic society unless it has talented and well-trained champions and tribunes for those who are economically oppressed. That's the tradition she came from and a tradition that she now passes on in improved and modernized form to the future. So what Emily did as a dean was to double down. In her years of association with NUSL, she supported and encouraged the development and expansion of our labor and employment offerings, which rival in diversity and coverage those of many larger and much better endowed institutions. Now, I'm hardly disinterested, but I think it is fair to say, and more importantly, professionals who have no connection to NUSL have said this. Our institution plays an outsized role in training and turning out recruits for the labor bar, young lawyers who enter the field and stick with it through their working lifetimes. That is a very great accomplishment, a great legacy in which Emily should take pride and for which we celebrate her today.
Ingrid Nava is one of the people who has passed through Northeastern Law School and is now Associate General Counsel for SEIU 32BJ. Very good.
Okay. I just want to start by saying I have known Emily now since she first came to Northeastern, and our paths continue to cross after I was out of here, and we've become friends. And when I have a question about workers' comp, I call Emily. Or when I'm thinking about how might we fashion workers' comp for workers that are misclassified and called independent contractors, I call Emily. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about her impact when I was a student here in her first year as dean. And as I was reflecting on Emily's tenure in preparation for today, I was thinking about her impact on me and why, though she wasn't even my law professor, her quote-unquote lessons have stuck with me. As I think we all know, and especially well at Northeastern, all learning doesn't happen in the classroom. And indeed, in some ways, the most important learning happens outside the classroom, especially in the law, where the art of the trade is learning how to apply the law to the myriad of factual circumstances that we will encounter as lawyers. Another truism about becoming a lawyer is that it can launch a person into an unsolicited leadership position. A friend of mine, when she graduated from law school, told me, I can't think of any other degree that I would get that would cause people, in her case, in a community organization, to constantly turn to me and ask, what do you think? It's this aspect of being a lawyer, how to be a leader, and that I learned from Emily. But before she got here, I did play a small part in her selection as dean. I was a 2L when the dean search that resulted in Emily's selection took place. And in typical Northeastern fashion, the students thought they had something to say about it and should be involved in the process. And also in typical Northeastern fashion, they were involved. My memory may not be perfect, but I do remember at least 2 student committees, and there were possibly more. There were 2 student representatives, as I recall, that participated in formal interviewing and discussion with faculty. And there was a larger group of students that organized and collected feedback from the student body at large, and I was part of that. And I remember clearly discussing and evaluating final candidates. And there are a couple of things I remember about Emily's candidacy. This was one. She said clearly in her candidacy, I'm not looking to be a dean, I'm not making an academic search in general. I'm interested in being a dean at Northeastern for this school with this mission. And she seemed to be able to appeal to many different elements of the institution, while at the same time being true to the mission and keeping eyes on the prize. From my vantage point as a student at the time, she seemed to value student input and the democratic culture of Northeastern, but also had an eye toward building the institution for the future. All in all, she seemed to me to be, and my student cohorts, the leader we wanted. As it turned out, in that first year of her deanship, my 3L year, her leadership would be tested, and I would be part of testing it. In the fall of my 3L year, the janitors that clean this university were engaged in a contract fight for a new collective bargaining agreement. Their contract fight culminated in a 3-week strike. The NLG student group wanted to support the janitors and enlisted me, who I'd been a fairly high-level union organizer for 7 years prior to coming to law school, to help them lead a 1-day student strike, which would march past President Ayoun's office, circle around and rally in support of the janitors. I remember my interactions with Emily at the time. I don't remember the exact words, but I do recall her saying something to the effect of, I can't sanction this. And I said, yes, I know. But whatever the exact words were of our exchanges, she let it be known that she understood my role and that she would play her role. I don't really know what she did, what conversations she had with anybody in the institution or behind the scenes. I do know that the student walkout was successful. A large majority of the students that day participated. And I know that the strike was successful. It was the beginning of what today is 100% full-time work and health care for janitors in downtown Boston. If you want to talk to me about the details later, I'm now Associate General Counsel of that unit. But the lessons of leadership there that I learned there was that everybody has a role to play, and you can lead by understanding and approaching the contributions of everyone and everyone's role. That's what I believe Emily did well, and what I believe I learned from her. And I was thinking about this kind of a lesson recently when I was listening to the confirmation hearing of Julie Sue, who's acting secretary for the Department of Labor. In her confirmation hearing, she was asked about her participation in 2 protests. One was what is known as the Stanford 89 protest, and one the Harvard Griswold 9 protest. I partially remember this because I was also instrumental in pulling off the Stanford 89 protest. But Senator Mike Braun of Indiana asked candidate Sue, how can that make us feel confident about you filling this spot when you participated in these protests? And her response was, at my Harvard graduation, the dean at the time, Dean Robert Clark, said, it's good to see Julie Sue sitting in my office talking about issues she sat in about rather than doing another sit-in. And she went on to say, I share this with you because there are many ways to make change and there are many ways to make the world a better place. And she suggested that her participation equips her to recognize the value of all kinds of change makers. I believe that Julie Sue and Emily are in similar company. And I'm glad that she was my dean. Though Emily's retiring, her lessons, both in and out of the classroom, remain with those of us who have learned from her. And I, for one, am happy to carry forward that torch. Thanks, Emily. And as we often say on the Spanish-speaking picket lines, pa'lante.
Sarah Schendel, another graduate of NUSL, is here to speak. From Suffolk University, where she's the, I'm going to botch this, an associate professor of academic support.
You nailed it.
Oh, right.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As Greg said, my name is Sarah Schendel, and I'm currently professor at Suffolk Law. I'm also an accidental academic, so I relate to that title. Before that, I was an immigration attorney, and before that, I was a public interest scholar here at Northeastern. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Emily I know, my dean, and my friend and mentor. And I'm sure many of you might recognize Emily in these statements as well. So to me, and perhaps to many of you, Emily is NUSL. She's everything I love about this school and why I chose to come here. From the moment she greeted the admitted students, she let us know that the school was not just here for its own sake, or for its prestige, or for ours. The school is here to train lawyers how to be lawyers, how to think critically about the law, and how to be of use to society and the people who need our help. She was no nonsense. She had actually practiced law and worked with people. She knew what it meant to be a client and what it meant to be an attorney. And she had expectations for us. She had expectations for the students at Northeastern and standards that conveyed a belief in us, and perhaps more importantly, reminded us that it wasn't about us, it was about our clients. Emily respects people. I suspect that her respect for people and her genuine curiosity about their experiences are two of the main drivers of her career. In my experience, she has a desire to learn about what different people's lives are like, and an underlying respect for the dignity of their work, no matter what that is. And that's what pushes her to demand equality and safety in all workplaces, for all people, in all settings. Emily is relentlessly committed to learning and to pushing herself. No matter if it's a class she has taught once or 10 times, she's always thinking about how to do it better, which is so inspiring to me as a professor. And it's not just about teaching, she thinks about how to do everything better. She's curious about the best ways to work, the best ways to connect, 7-minute phone calls, the best ways to exercise, to read, British mysteries mainly, I agree, to travel, to be a parent and a friend and a citizen. Sometimes I suggest that maybe she doesn't need to do everything, or at least not do everything perfectly, but she is who she is, and I don't think that will change, and I'm glad. I once knew Emily as Dean Spieler, and I feel so lucky now to know her as Emily. And sometimes I have a moment where I get to see that she's both, and I get to see the enormity of the years that I've known her. And recently my worlds converged when she was selected as the annual Donahue Speaker by the editors of Suffolk Law Review. And getting to sit alongside Greg and see my beloved, amazing students who inspire me every day, and watch Emily command the room with an impassioned and brilliant talk about the lack of protections for the most vulnerable workers during the pandemic, reminded me that she's not only my mentor, but a scholar and an inspiration for so many. So I could go on, but I know that this is both Emily's heaven and hell, I think, having to hear people talk about her for so long. And these last few years haven't been easy for so many of us, I know including Emily and Greg. But I feel so lucky to be one of the many who experience Emily's relentless drive to learn, to enjoy life, and to celebrate together with loved ones. And I hope that joy returns to them tenfold in the coming years. To Emily.
Margaret Burnham is listed as a University Distinguished Professor of Law, but she is so much more, and I am really happy to call her to finish this up, or finish Emily off, or something. I know.
I know I'm the only thing standing
No, between
you. between you and Emily, I'm the only thing standing, and between whatever refreshments may be left in the back of the room. And so I know I should be brief, but I also need to take my time on this one. So I came to know Emily in September 2002. We were in the same class, as it were. It was Rashmi and Martha and Taylor Flynn, who is here, and me and our new dean, Emily, who was the school's first woman dean, all joining this family here at Northeastern at the same time. And so it kind of brings to mind, for me, classmates all starting off as college firsts in their first year and saying to each other, we came in together and we're leaving together. Emily is jumping over the finish line before us. And that's just not fair. But it is also typical Emily. First across every finish line, no sweat, no tears, no drama, just, well, finished. And yes, indeed, as we look back on her legacy here today, she has finished quite an impressive bit of work. Congratulations, Emily. So you've heard from James and Carl and Ingrid and Sarah. And as I say, will try to be brief. As brief as I can, because the dragons that Emily has slain here at the law school are many, and the friends that she's made for us here at the law school, those friends, that list is obscenely long. Emily, she's bad. Bad in a good way. She's fire, which means she's really cool. She blew the place up. She's the bomb. She killed it. And you all know what all that means. She's just fabulous. And it's not just that list of a lifetime of successful projects that she brings, that bring us together here today to celebrate Emily. Honoring Emily is for us also a time to reflect on who we are, what we represent, who we stand for, and who we stand with here at NUSA. For much of what we take for granted today, much of what we deem to be DNA here, it was nurtured and in some cases conceived by Emily Spieler, who came here from West Virginia, where, as I understand it, she slayed many dragons and made many friends. But when she came here in 2002 to Huntington Avenue, she committed herself to the traditions and promise of progressive legal education, which is to say, to an educational project that centers the experiential, that reaches beyond liberal legalism, that integrates critical legal theories across the whole curriculum, while reconceptualizing the historic mission of all law schools, which is to prepare a diverse group of students to protect and defend democratic norms, equality, and genuine justice, to help students become, as Sarah has just reminded us, to become, as Charles Hamilton Houston put it, social engineers. Emily held to these ethics when times were grim, and they were during her deanship. She was here in 2008, 2009, and 2010, when our enrollments almost hit the cellar. And she was here as well when times were not so bad. And perhaps it is her history as a labor leader, bringing the labor lawyer, bringing the long struggles of that movement to our table that prepared her so well for what she navigated here at Northeastern. And here, as the dean has reminded us, on the bricks and mortar side, with all due respect to Charles and Estelle Doxer, this building is really Spieler Hall. M's place. There may have been promises from on high, and thank you very much, President Freeland, who was here earlier today, for all that you did. But it was Dean M. who got it done. This space, our dean insisted that students deserved a lovely and commodious space to congregate, to meet, and here we are. Thank you very much. The clinics. Those of you who are long in the tooth, and there are a few of you in this room, you will remember that way back then, before Doxa Hall, the clinics were way over yonder, on the other side of Columbus Avenue. And Emily brought them back home and returned them literally to the heart of the law school. And by the way, it was Emily who inaugurated the first dean for experiential education, a position that Jim Rowan filled under Emily's leadership. But back to the space, folks. There's before Doxa and after Doxa, and these are two entirely different worlds. We thank you, Emily. Thank you for the scores of meetings. Thank you for speaking up on behalf of our school and its future with the leadership up there, for the endless negotiations with the architects and planners and space consultants. It was all worth it because we have now M's place. Friends, Emily created more than an edifice. She quietly supported so many of the faculty initiatives that give this school its definition and distinction. The program on human rights and the global economy was launched under her watch. With Emily's leadership, Wendy and Dick and Kristen were able to ramp up our health programming, leading to the establishment under the leadership of Jeremy as dean of the renowned Center on Health, Policy, and Law. Emily's fingerprint, her fingerprint is all over the NU Law Lab. And the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project. It was Emily who brought in the yeast money. It was Emily who gave us the green light. It was Emily who helped shape our first conference in 2007, who encouraged and guided us even when we were not absolutely convinced that what we were doing made good sense. She was there for us. And then 2 years ago, long after her deanship had been completed, and when she could well have rested on her laurels, she came back to us, and she also started and launched the Center for Law, Equity, and Race, and persuaded our dean to give it the green light. As teachers and faculty members, Emily trusted us. She identified synergies that we ourselves might have missed. And she took the long view, knowing that some of the projects that she helped incubate might not blossom until years after her deanship was over. And in fact, that some of them might never blossom, but they were well worth the risk. I can remember a faculty member, some of you will remember, a faculty member who will remain nameless but now lives, I think, somewhere down south. And Emily thought that was a risk worth taking, and she took it. She was patient. It wasn't unbounded patience, and it wasn't unconditional love, but rather it was uniquely an M combination. She was strict but flexible, demanding but also understanding, exacting but forgiving. Her smile was slow to come, but was it ever warm when it finally arrived? She walked the halls of the law school. Back then, we actually worked in our offices. And Emily would come by, and if the door were open, she'd come in. And even if the door weren't open, she'd knock on the door, and she would come in. And she'd take the temperature of the place over and over and over again. Not in an intrusive way, but in a way suggesting that she wanted to know what was going on across the whole building. She brought with her from West Virginia some distinctive ideas about how to create community. And she and Greg were gracious hosts to our faculty and our staff, and we thank you for that. And our families during her tenure. And speaking for myself, I was particularly happy to meet our colleagues, family members, and their children at Emily's home. Those were really precious moments. Thank you, Emily. There was all of that for which we are really grateful. And I have to say that although we, Emily and I, were in the same class, I really got to know the whole Emily, the wise Emily, the eminently strategic Emily, the Emily who picks her shots carefully and avoids the wrong fights, the Em who knows how organizations swim and what keeps them afloat, the M who centers community-driven praxis, who intuits what makes people click, the Emily who really does like people and wants to see each and every one of them thrive. That Emily I got to know after her deanship when she came to CRRJ as our senior advisor. Much of our success we owe to her early vision, but particularly important, her impactful return to CRRJ and to CLEAR. Thank you, Emily. We appreciate you deeply. You're a mensch. As the Duke said, we love you dearly, we love you forever, we love you, what did the Duke say? We love you madly! You have left your mark on this place and on each of us.
Okay, my turn. Oh, I can see why people are. Okay, so first, starting with a little gratitude for this event, Natalia and Deb, who's new here and got tested through this process, I think. Deb Feldman, who did a lot of the work with Greg Bailey, who's here taking photos, and of course Greg. I did not know he was pretty good. And everyone who spoke. You know, the three women grads, Stephanie Ainbinder's been with COVID, or she would have been here. The three women graduates I asked to speak exemplify what's best about the story. They're smart, creative, kind, committed, willing to test ideas and take risks. And all three of them are people I hope will become friends for the rest of their life. About West Virginia. Too bad Greg couldn't tell the rest of the stories. What about the one where the AG was indicted and I had to be a prosecution witness? Anyway, yes, there are a lot of stories that can be told about those years. And from those years, Gail Falk, who spoke early on and who started that litigation against Union Carbide, is actually here with us tonight, as are many people who sort of span my entire life. The West Virginia stories can definitely go on and on. And then, of course, the question is, why did we leave? And I think I got bored at WVU, and I wasn't sure I wanted to get old there. But did I miss it? When we got here, too many people said, oh, you must be so glad to be Boston. And I'm going to take this out. Yeah. You must be so glad to be in Boston, assuming that somehow the more than 25 years that we had spent in West Virginia were inconsequential or didn't mean something deeply personal for us. But I think that there's no question that the experiences we had and the friends we made in West Virginia were and continue to be incredibly important to us. And that cabin you saw our kids building, yeah, we still go back there every year. So, about NUSL. I do love this school. I told that to the senior leadership and Neil Finnegan, the chair of the Board of Trustees, when I was dean regularly, when they would say they love Northeastern University, but they wish they had a law school more like BU's. I was, in fact, Ingrid, an improbable candidate for the deanship. I did, in fact, throw my letter over the transom. I had never done any academic administration. I had never been interested in any academic administration, including being an associate dean. My sympathies for those of you who have served in that capacity. I never applied, as I said, to another law school dean position. This was, in fact, the only law school I was ever interested in leading. I said that in 2002, and it remained true. Is Jane Scarborough here? She said she might come, and I was going to say that I think that she made it her task to get me here. The second running, by the way, so some of you may remember this, the second person in line for this job was Jamie Raskin. And last year I wrote him a note saying that I thought we could all be glad that he didn't get the job. I've been cleaning out my office, which is a really interesting task, and I recently came across my job talk from people in 2002. And what I said then is all still true to say. So here's how I started that talk. I said why I think Northeastern is different. When I think of traditional or generic law schools, I think about schools that are hierarchical and non-collaborative and that have a commitment to value-free academy-centered learning and research and scholarship. I'm not saying that individuals in these schools don't have deeply held values, but that the culture of the legal academy supports both hierarchy and value neutrality. In this model, the common bond is in the lawyering itself. As someone else has said, an adversary system premised upon an equal contest of contrary interests, as if we achieve equality that way. The good society is achieved through the development of general rules in this model, applied in an even-handed fashion to all. The lawyer's role is simply to serve the client's interests within the bounds of professional ethical canons. What interests you represent and the positions you take are less important than being an upstanding participant in the process. There's a disconnect between faculty who largely regard themselves as progressive or liberal, although there are obvious exceptions to this, and the generic law student being told to strive for a neutral identity. But the model is in many ways the easier path because it leaves out any institutional struggle over societal inequalities and what responsibility a law school or the lawyers and trainees have to these issues. It appears to me, as I said in 2002, that Northeastern is different. There are two critical elements to this difference. First, a commitment to experiential learning and to engaging with the world outside the academy. And second, a vision of law as a vehicle for achieving social justice. It is the combination of real-world engagement and commitment to social justice, not either on its own, that makes NUSL different. A commitment to social justice on its own might produce progressive theory, but it will not produce gut-level understanding of the complexity of many issues, particularly issues of inequality. Engagement in the world on its own can result in good lawyering, but not in a commitment to social justice. It's the combination of these two things that makes Northeastern attractive to me, I said then. For me, the question is how to achieve a successful private sector law school in today's world and build on these values. So that's what I said in 2002. There was a lot more in that talk. It's actually pretty interesting. But that's been the core question I've been wrestling with my entire lifetime at Northeastern. And I will continue to, as I continue to work with CRRJ and with Dan Jackson and the NU Law Lab and some of the rest of you on projects. So, what does retirement mean? Saying I'm retired sure doesn't tell you much, does it? Friends are moving to different words, evolving, repurposing. I don't know if any of the rest of you get Bob Reich's endless emails off his list. Bob was a law school classmate of mine, and his himself going through a retirement process, cleaning out his office and having a retirement event. And he said, if one more person congratulates me on retiring and asks what I'm planning to do with all my extra time as if they're addressing a quaint relic now put on a shelf to mildew, I'm going to scream. I retired from teaching, but not from life. I still do hundreds of other things. I don't have any extra time. I can't possibly get everything done I want to do. Retirement just means more time to do what you like and less what you don't. It's not the end, it's not a void. And as must have been evident from the time I spent in West Virginia, I've left other jobs before. So, what retirement means for me, things I will be delighted to stop doing. Faculty service. Thank you, James, for appointing me to be chair of the curriculum committee this year. It made me so happy. Faculty meetings. Writing exams and grading them. I have a number of students from my spring course here, and we were just bonding. Oh, God, I hate grading. Receiving endless emails about things I don't really care enough about. And frankly, teaching full-length courses over and over again, although maybe I'll do some teaching of some kind going forward. What I will miss most, the regular interaction with young people who face the world with more optimism than I can muster sometimes, and for whom the hope for the future lies. Things I'll continue to do: work with low-wage workers on health and safety. A nod to Marcy and David, but also Stacy Sposik, who's here, I think still here, and I don't know if Alan Pierce made it or not. I told Alan at the last MCLE thing I taught at that I was going to now have time to go back to being an activist. I'm not sure how you felt about that. I hope to be able to mentor students and young lawyers. I do intend to work with CRJ and to some extent with the NU Law Lab. Maybe I'll do some writing, hopefully not for law reviews. In cleaning out my office, I've found some pretty interesting unfinished projects, some with long outlines and lots of research. And I'm thinking I doubt I will finish any of those. Things I will do more of: paint, play music, cook for and with friends, get to know some of you better, renew friendships, read poetry, hang out with people without an agenda, travel, walk and exercise more, and stop striving. Stop to smell the roses. Definitely that. And maybe less of some of the other things as a result. Focus more on today and not tomorrow, because it's time to admit I'm getting old. I'll be turning 75 this summer. Greg and I just celebrated this month our 50th wedding anniversary, and you saw the picture. And as a lot of you know, he and I have had a lot of health challenges over the last few years, and it reminds us of our own fragility. The one thing I can say about this next phase for sure is that I no longer feel I can act as if I'm immortal. So, returning to gratitude. I'm sad that Richard Freeland left because it was an interesting process persuading him he could hire someone to be dean who was coming from West Virginia. But thank you for accepting that someone coming from West Virginia could measure up to Boston standards. Thank you for the opportunity to work at a special place. Thank you to everyone here who made my time at NUSL as dean and as a member of the faculty worthwhile, challenging, and often fun. To my students, those of you who are here, thank you for a fabulous spring term. My faculty colleagues and committed staff. Sarah Sayas, some of you will remember, who was here, was my just invaluable associate dean for a number of years. Thank you to Luann and James, who made going on development trips way more fun than I imagined they could be. And to all of the friends and family and colleagues who are here tonight. I'm really looking forward to spending more time with you.
James gets it. He does have
Emily, we have a small expression of our appreciation and also memory from us, and also there's another gift over there, but we'll give it separately.
Labor law trailblazer, Northeastern University School of Law. May I say, the first and as yet only.
And the important term in there is first. Yeah, so we definitely.
Okay. Stand up and have fun. There's still food and drink available.
Thank you, Greg, for doing that.